Hi mathematicians, in this video I'm going to show you how to start with an equation, and this equation represents a line, which is why it's a linear equation. And the reason I know that is because it has this x and y variable which corresponds to the x and y axis that we would need in order to graph that line. And it's in standard form when it's in this format right here. And we'll get more in depth about why you might want to use an equation in standard form. But for now, I'm just going to show you how to start off with an equation written in this format, and then we are going to convert it. So that means we're going to try to finish. So after we've converted, now we're still going to have a linear, still going to make a line because it still has that x and that y, and it's of course still an equation, but it's in a different format, slope intercept form. So by the end of this video, hopefully you will be able to start off with an equation in standard form and convert it, just change it around so that it ends up in slope intercept form. So let's get started. So here in example 1, you see that I have an equation that is in standard form. And by the end, we want it to look like this. So the first thing that I notice is that the way we want it to end up, that y is by itself. And remember, in math, that means that the y is isolated. So we need to do a series of steps to get this y in our standard form to be by itself. So one thing that's jumping out at me about the format that we want to end up with is that the x and the number in front of it is on the right-hand side of the equal sign, whereas over here, the x is on the left side of the equal sign. So that means that in order to get this to look like that, one of the first things I need to do is get that 4x over to the other side of the equal sign. So I'm going to have to cancel that 4x. So in order to isolate that y value, again, I'm going to need to cancel that 4x. So that 4x that is over here on the left-hand side of the equal sign. And how do I cancel out a 4x? I use the inverse. And the inverse of a 4x is a minus 4x. And keep in mind that what you do to an equation, you have to do on both sides. So now that we know what step 1 is going to be, I'm going to zoom in here. I'm going to do step 1. So I'm going to take away that 4x from the left-hand side. And because I have to do it on the other side as well, I'm going to put it over here. So these 4 x's have now canceled each other out. They're not there any longer. So I'm just going to bring down the 5y, my equal sign, and 10 minus 4x. It's important to note that I am not going to do 10 minus 4 to get 6. I'm not going to do that because I don't know what x is equal to, which means that I can't combine the 10 and the 4x because they're not like terms. So now if I look at what I have versus what I want it to look like, the y again needs to be all by itself. But if I look at what I have, the y is not all the way by itself. It's not isolated yet because I still have this 5. So I need to cancel out that 5. The inverse of that 5 is not, okay, so we're not going to say minus 5. The reason we're not going to say minus 5 is because Now I'm going to get out my handy little reference sheet that we've used in class before. When you have two things that are sitting next to each other, that means multiplication. So this actually means this. So this means 5 times y. So how do I cancel a 5 times y? Well, the inverse, oh, that's messy. There we go, that's a little neater. So 5 times y, the inverse or the opposite of multiplication is division. So we are going to divide by 5. And we're going to divide by 5 in order to cancel out multiplying by 5. And remember, in big kid math, we use a fraction bar to represent division. So to cancel out that multiplication, we're going to divide. So those 5s are going to cancel each other out so that now my y is isolated. But remember how equations work. If I do something on one side, it must be done to both sides of the equal sign. So I also have to divide this side by 5. So now my y is isolated, but I have 10 minus 4x all divided by 5. So we've made our goal of isolating the y just like we need it to be. But so we've got the y isolated, but the right-hand side doesn't exactly look like what we want it to look like on the right-hand side. So our final step is that we're going to do a little simplifying and rearranging. And I'm going to zoom in here so you can get an idea of what I mean. So I'm going to rewrite this as two separate parts. So I'm going to separate the 10 and the minus 4x, and I'm going to say 10 divided by 5. And then I'm going to say 4x divided by 5 because I am dividing both of them by 5. So all I did was take it from one big problem into two like smaller pieces, but it still means the same thing. So then 10 divided by 5 is 2. And then negative 4 divided by 5 is negative 4/5 as a simplified fraction. If you don't know how to do that, please let me know and I will help you. And then we can't forget there is still an x hanging out there. So this is looking more and more and more like what we want it to look like. And even though this is technically not wrong, this is okay. The way that you typically see slope-intercept form written, the x comes first, and then the number out to the side comes second. So I'm going to do one last step to rearrange so that it's negative 4/5 x comes first, and the plus 2 comes second. So now I've rearranged my equation that started out in standard form so that now it is in slope-intercept form. So we're going to work one more problem together a little bit faster. So again, this is where we're starting with standard form. And when we get finished, we want that y to be isolated. So to isolate the y, I'm going to zoom in over here and see what I've got going on. So again, just like last time, the x needs to get moved over to the other side of the equal sign. So I'm going to cancel a minus 3x. And what's the opposite of a minus 3x? Well, that's going to be a plus 3x. And we need to do it on both sides. So I'm going to zoom in and do that step. So the inverse, the opposite of a minus 3x, is to add a plus 3x. And we need to do it on both sides of the equal sign. So these guys are canceled out That's going to leave me with that 2y. And again, I can't put an 8 and a 3x together because we don't know what x is worth, so they're not like terms. So now I've almost got my y isolated, except of course we need to cancel out that 2. And just like before, the 2 is sitting next to the y, so that means 2 times y, which means we have to cancel 2 times y. And what is the inverse? What is the opposite of multiplication? You got it, division. So we're going to divide both sides of our equal sign by 2. So remember, we write division as a fraction bar. So that 2 is now going to be canceled out. We have achieved our goal of isolating the x. I'm sorry, oops, I've achieved my goal of isolating the y. But what I've got still doesn't quite look exactly like what I want it to. So I'm going to separate the 8 and the 3x, and I'm going to divide them both by 2 separately to make that a little bit easier to work with. So 8 divided by 2 is 4. And then 3 divided by 2 as a simplified fraction is 3 over 2. If you don't know how to do that, I will help you with that. Please let me know. And then don't forget about the x. And then finally, in slope-intercept form, again, this is not wrong. However, typically, we're going to see the x before we see the number. So I'm going to do one more alteration, and I'm going to flip them around so that this is in more of the traditional y equals mx plus b.